Hi everyone, this is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. Today's episode is going to be entitled The 5 Astral Plane Senses. I'm going to talk about how the astral senses differ from the physical ones, and then I'm going to give you my theory at the end for why some astral projectors have seemingly reported sensory information that really shouldn't belong on the astral plane. Without further ado, let's get started. Our physical bodies have adapted an array of 5 senses that have evolved over millennia to help the human species to survive in a hostile world. However, the astral body has a very different set of senses that enable it to function in an environment that is very different from our earthly world. In this story, I'd like to compare and contrast our physical senses with their astral counterparts. Let's start with physical and astral sight. Now, in physical sight, you have human eyes. They're forward-facing, giving us binocular vision that most predatory species have to locate prey and to estimate distance. Our rods and cones give us relatively good sight in the color spectrum, but we're pretty average in the mammalian group for visual acuity. Our peripheral sight is pretty average as well. The optic nerve transmits the information to the brain, which then interprets the data, and the image then becomes available to our consciousness. Now let's talk about astral sight. When an astral projector first leaves his or her body, their vision can often be dim and even sometimes temporarily absent. In other words, initial blindness. Color, I find, is usually absent, with grays, blacks, and whites dominating the visual spectrum. Now, once the astral projector travels around 20 yards or meters from his physical body, full color vision usually kicks in. The colors are rich and vibrant, much more so than with physical sight. Visual acuity is basically 100%. I mean, whatever you can see from a line of sight, you can wish to zero in on. You can wish to see very clearly. In some cases, the image comes to you. In some cases, you go to the image. So let's call it 100%. All you have to do, as I said, is just get line of sight. Some people have reported 360-degree vision, and this has happened to me in the past. However, I find this phenomena is normally rarely reported because that type of an input typically confuses humans who, in the physical, we're used to our forward-facing vision. So I think some of that data probably ends up being ignored because we can't properly deal with it. Astral sight has been referenced in ancient Indian sacred texts as the third eye for thousands of years. Many times when I astral project, my vision seems to originate from the middle of my forehead rather than the locations of my physical eye sockets. However, astral vision can vary from person to person and from projection to projection. I was recently talking to my daughter Rose, whom you met during one of our joint videos a while back. She had another astral projection, and she experienced color right away, she said, but her vision faded in and out in a way she described as, quote, goopy. Now keep in mind she's a physician's assistant, so she typically uses highly technical medical terminology, so you and I might not understand it, but there it is. I'm very proud father. Of all the 5 senses, I believe sight is probably the most similar to our current physical sense of sight as perceived by us humans. Let's go on now to hearing in the physical versus the astral. Experiments have shown that a healthy young person hears all sound frequencies between approximately 20 to 20,000 hertz. As these sound waves oscillate through the air, our ears collect the vibrations and through a series of delicate bones in an air-filled chamber. The auditory vestibular nerve, known as the eighth cranial nerve, this comes from my daughter's medical books, then transmits the sound to the brain. Equilibrium or balance information from the inner ear is also sent to the brain as well. So we help to maintain our balance that way. Humans have used this sense of hearing for detecting the footfalls of approaching predators, to enjoying music and communicating with one another in spoken languages. This particular sense allowed humans to pass knowledge and experience to one another by speaking and being heard. Without this ability, humans would probably still be living in small, primitive hunter-gatherer bands roaming the planet. Let's talk about astral hearing now. The astral body does not hear as we do in the physical. Any astral ears you may see on someone is purely for cosmetic purposes. In the astral, there is no air. There are no waves of sound to be transmitted through the air. There are no ears to hear this collected vibration. Instead, we have an advanced form of telepathy, which is the means of communication. Newbies on the astral plane might just get basic messages when communicating with an entity. However, more advanced astral projectors will receive information that not only provides facts, but a 3D world full of information in which the receiver understands the information provided as if he himself had been there to perceive the information. It's virtual reality that's completely nuts. Now, I know some folks are going to ask about music. What about music? Are you saying that we're going to be denied music? I know many people are passionate about their music, and I imagine that this would be something that they would ask about. When I was orbiting Saturn on the ice rock, I could feel the radiation coming from Saturn all throughout my body, like a complex symphony that I was an actual component of. My emotions waxed and waned with a flow of Saturn's pulses, giving me a transcendent experience, more than I've ever experienced listening to London or the Boston Symphony Orchestras, or even a very memorable Rolling Stones one-night-only concert in Las Vegas. Now, a very rich form of music does exist on the astral. You won't hear it with ears, but you will sense its majestic power as it draws you into its complex energy matrices. Let's get into touch. Physical versus astral touch. The human body has a complex network of nerves that relay sensory information to our brains to give us a sense of touch. We can feel the softness of a small child's cheek or the roughness of a coarse piece of sandpaper. We can feel the cold of winter and the infernal heat of a deep southern summer, or the licking flames of a fireplace in a mountain cabin. Our sense of touch gives us a rich array of sensory data for our use. We also use it to avoid damaging our physical bodies by avoiding hot stoves or clasping a thorn bush. Let's get into astral touch now and remember what we use physical touch for and why it's helped us. In the astral, the sense of touch as we understand it in the physical is largely absent. I say largely because newbies can sometimes say they feel something by touch in the astral. In reality, they're actually using their physical prejudices to fool themselves into thinking they can actually feel the sensation of touch in their astral forms. Now, in place of our rather coarse physical touch, we have astral touch. When you touch something in the astral, especially in the higher energy states, you get the information on the history of the object. You can sense its origin or creation, echoes from anyone who has ever touched this item prior to your visit. If there is a level of conscious thought and or emotion, you will get a weak to strong understanding of that information as well. So you're getting a plethora, a very rich set of sensory information, which is completely absent to us when we touch an object in the physical. Let's see here. Physical smell versus astral smell. Physical smell, what is that? It's the sense of you smell, basically there's molecules of volatile substances in the air. And these particles, minute particles of these substances go up through our nose. And this information then is interpreted by our brains, and then we decide whether this was a pleasant aroma, like a field of wildflowers, or the pungent and malodorous emissions of a skunk. Smell has worked in tandem with the sense of taste to alert humans to the presence of possible poisons before we consumed them. Now, what about astral smell? Well, I'm sorry, but there's just no astral equivalent to smell. I've talked with entities in the past who have never had physical lifetimes, and trying to explain things to them like smell and taste is extraordinarily hard. I can give them a memory of these things, but they have a hard time really understanding it. It's so alien to them, they have no frame of reference. Even when I give them these memories, it's still, they ask questions like, okay, was this a good smell or taste, or was this a bad one? I mean, it seems like common sense to us because our brains tell us this information, but to them, they had no sense of it at all. But let's talk about astral smell for a second. There is just no such thing. Now, it is possible that your memories might convince you that if you're in a field of wildflowers, that perhaps you're actually smelling them, but it's just not possible. In the astral, the sense of smell is just not needed. Lastly, let's talk about the sensation of taste. Now, the human ability to taste foods has helped us to detect the presence of substances that might poison us. Many, but not all, poisons are perceived by us as bitter or unpleasant tasting. Over the centuries, this sense has evolved to allow us a sophisticated palate that that allows us to enjoy fine wines and caviar to cheeseburgers and Cokes. Astral taste. Once again, I'm sorry, but there just is no sense of taste of foods on the astral plane. For one thing, there's no necessity to eat on the astral plane. You don't need to eat coarse physical foods to maintain a physical body because you don't have a physical body. Now, I have seen people in some planes, usually somewhere in the middle, sitting down with a group of folks with what I call a phantom banquet. And on that, there are foods, and if you, simulate eating these simulated phantom foods, You can recall their tastes if you make an effort to do so. But that is an intellectual exercise. It is not a true sense of taste or smell. It's merely a simulated one. Lastly, I want to mention something that's kind of a theory of mine, and we'll see what you think about my theory. In the physical, there's something called a phantom limb syndrome. In the physical, the phantom limb syndrome is a condition in which patients experience sensations, whether painful or otherwise, in a limb that does not exist. It has been reported to occur in 80 to 100% of amputees. Researchers don't know exactly what causes phantom limb pain. One possible explanation that nerves in parts of your spinal cord and brain rewire when they lose signals from the missing arm or leg. As a result, they send pain signals. A typical response when your body senses something is wrong. So another example of this type of rewiring might be, let's say you touch one body part, say your hip or your forearm. Your brain might interpret that, because of this rewiring, that you're feeling this touch or this pain or what have you in your missing limb. This syndrome has prompted me to come up with what I call the astral phantom sense syndrome. This is just my theory. In the astral, I think there are times that we think we perceive physical senses in the astral, especially for people who are newer. But it's really just our minds in translating astral information into a more familiar physical box that we're used to feeling. Like, for instance, when I told you about the sight in the astral, 360-degree vision is possible. But because we're just not used to having that in the physical, I think it's very natural in the astral for us to ignore this capability and not be aware of it, because we're not used to that level of 360-degree sensory visual information. And for example, like I said, I stated the example of being at some sort of phantom astral banquet and thinking that you're tasting these foods. Existence on the astral plane is very different from that on the physical plane. It's no wonder that the senses that are provided are very different and are optimized to fit the astral and not the physical. In a very real way, when we're on the astral, we're on another planet. So why would we assume that the same senses that helped us to survive in these coarse physical bodies over the millennia on planet Earth would be the same ones that we would need on the planet astral? That's what I wanted to discuss this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did like this episode, please hit the like button. If you have friends or family who you want to impress with your taste in astral projection channels, please share it. If you haven't subscribed already, please do that. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, please leave those below. I try to answer all of those things on a regular basis as quickly as possible, and I always enjoy reading your comments or suggestions about future astral projection topics. There is a website, astralplaneclub.com, that you can check out, and I'll leave the address in the description. And as always, I will see you on the astral plane.